The truth is, I think I went down to the gym almost hoping that I'd find you doing something wrong. You know, anything. So I could feel superior to you and your skinny butt. So I'm sorry. Reba's voice was barely a whisper, thick with shame and genuine regret. The words, once unspoken, now hung in the air, raw and vulnerable. Barbara Jean stared at her, her expression unreadable. Reba braced herself for an outburst, for anger, for the end of their friendship. But instead, a slow smile spread across Barbara Jean's face, a genuine, delighted smile that reached her eyes. Sorry. Yeah, this is great. For the first time since we've known each other, you want to be me. Reba blinked, completely taken aback. I don't want to be you. Barbara Jean laughed, a joyous, unburdened sound. I know, it's even better. You want to look like me. She threw her arms around Reba, pulling her into a tight, exuberant hug. Reba, still reeling from the emotional roller coaster, hugged her back, a tentative smile forming on her lips. It wasn't the reaction she had expected, but it was, surprisingly, exactly what she needed. The honesty, the vulnerability, had cleared the air, paving the way for a deeper understanding. Their friendship, it seemed, was not only intact but stronger for having weathered the storm of insecurity and misunderstanding. Barbara Jean, still beaming, pulled away. Hey, where are you going? Reba gestured vaguely towards the kitchen. Just gonna go grab something to eat. I'll see you next year. She needed a moment, a quiet space to process everything. And maybe, just maybe, she'd consider a power smoothie, or at least, a smaller donut. Chapter 5. Rebuilding Bridges and the Flannel Pajama Confession. The dust settled slowly in the Hart Montgomery household. The aftermath of the Great Gym confrontation left behind a lingering scent of awkward apologies and tentative reconciliations. Brock, thoroughly chastened by the revelation of Jordan's sexuality and Reba's confession of insecurity, had spent the evening making amends to Barbara Jean. Reba, too, had offered a more heartfelt, less self-deprecating apology to her best friend, a conversation that had somehow, miraculously, brought them closer. The next morning, a fragile peace had descended. Reba was still processing the raw honesty of her own admission that she had secretly wanted to find fault with Barbara Jean, to feel superior. It was an ugly truth, but owning it felt surprisingly liberating. The kids, however, remained oblivious to the deeper emotional currents. Jake was engrossed in a cartoon, while Van and Ben were locked in their usual rock-paper-scissors battle. Hey, buddy, what are we watching? Van asked, trying to distract Jake from his show. Jake just grunted, eyes glued to the screen. No, we're not, Ben said, anticipating Van's next move. Want a rock, paper, scissor for it? Fine, let's go, Van grinned, already confident of victory. You're gonna pick scissors, aren't you? Ben groaned, knowing his fate was sealed. Get out, Van exclaimed, triumphant, as Ben inevitably lost. Reba watched them, a small, weary smile on her face. Some things, she realized, never changed. And perhaps that was a comfort. Later that evening, as the house finally quieted, Cheyenne approached Van, who was sprawled on the couch, flipping through channels. Her face was still etched with a subtle hurt from his new pretty comment about Barbara Jean. Hey, honey, Van said, not looking up from the TV. Cheyenne sat beside him, her voice soft. Hey baby, I need to talk to you. Oh honey, I just got the TV, Van mumbled, clearly more interested in the flickering screen. Cheyenne took a deep breath. Well, I started thinking that maybe you don't think of me as new pretty, because I don't do enough to keep your interest. She had been replaying his words in her head all day, and the insecurity had festered. Van finally looked at her, his expression softening as he registered the pain in her eyes. He reached out and gently stroked her hair. No, honey, you're way hot. He squeezed her hand. But anyway, I thought that maybe I should, change my look every now and then just to keep things fresh. So I bought a wig. She pulled a ridiculously garish blonde wig from behind her back, holding it up with a tentative smile. Van stared at the wig, then back at Cheyenne, his heart aching at her vulnerability. He gently took the wig from her hand and set it aside. Cheyenne, put that down. Listen to me. He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. I think it's a good thing that when I look at you I don't see the beautiful girl with the killer bod. He paused, and Cheyenne's face fell. bracing for another insensitive remark. But then he continued, his voice earnest and sincere. I see my wife, and I'm attracted to her whether she's all dressed up, ready to go out, or just sitting on the couch wearing those washed-up flannel pajamas. Cheyenne's eyes welled up with tears. Really? She whispered, a fragile hope in her voice. Van nodded, his gaze unwavering. Yeah, you're beautiful to me because of who you are. Cheyenne leaned into him, burying her face in his shoulder, a wave of relief washing over her. I feel kinda stupid. Van chuckled, wrapping his arms around her. That's also who you are, and I love it. He kissed the top of her head. Come on, you. Where are we going? Cheyenne asked, a playful glint in her eyes. Van grinned. Oh, we are going upstairs. Cheyenne pulled back, a mischievous sparkle in her eyes. Hold on. I thought you didn't want me to wear that. She gestured towards the discarded wig. Van laughed, pulling her closer. Sometimes I want to feel new pretty. Cheyenne smiled, a genuine, confident smile that reached her eyes. She knew he loved her, wig or no wig, flannel pajamas or not. And that, she realized, was the most beautiful kind of pretty there was. Meanwhile, Reba sat in her own living room, watching the last vestiges of daylight fade. She thought about Barbara Jean, about Cheyenne, about the unexpected turns their lives had taken. Change was inevitable, sometimes painful, but often it led to a deeper understanding, a stronger connection. She thought about her own reflection, the lines around her eyes, the familiar curves that had always been hers. Maybe she wasn't new pretty, but she was Reba. And perhaps that was enough. More than enough. The journey was far from over, but for now, in the quiet embrace of her home, Reba felt a sense of peace. The end. The aroma of burnt toast and stale coffee usually signaled the start of another chaotic morning in Reba Hart's household. Today, however, a new, more unsettling scent hung in the air, the faint, cloying sweetness of desperation. Or maybe it was just the leftover pizza from last night. That woman is out of control, Van Rebus muttered, his voice barely a whisper, yet laced with an almost theatrical horror. He gestured dramatically towards the kitchen, where a figure, vaguely resembling a human, was currently engaged in a silent, yet vigorous, battle with a half-eaten loaf of bread. She's like a locust. She has eaten everything in the house. Reba, perched precariously on a stool, nursing a mug of lukewarm coffee, didn't need to ask who that woman was. Mrs. H., a distant relative of Van's, had been visiting for the past week, and her presence had indeed been substantial, not just physically, but she's eaten everything in Mr. H's house, too, I hear, Ben Vaughn's perpetually unlucky friend added, peering around the corner with wide, nervous eyes. Look, even the salt and pepper shakers are empty. Reba sighed, running a hand through her already disheveled red hair. Why don't you just tell her she's eaten too much? She suggested, her tone flat. She had 3 kids, a demanding job, and a perpetually messy house. Confronting a 70-year-old woman about her eating habits was not high on her priority list. Van's head snapped towards Ben. You tell her. Ben recoiled as if Van had suggested he wrestle a bear. No, you tell her. Rock, paper, scissors, Van declared, his eyes gleaming with mischievous intent. Ben groaned. Ben, you know you're going to lose. Not this time, Ben insisted, puffing out his chest with a rare burst of confidence. Reba watched, an amused, weary smile playing on her lips. This was a ritual, a domestic farce that played out with predictable regularity. Van always won, Ben always lost. 1, 2, 3, they chanted in unison, hands flying. Dang it, Ben wailed, his shoulders slumping. Why do you always beat me? Van, because you always pick scissors. Of course I do. It's my system. Ben threw his hands up in exasperation. So, you'll tell her. Reba watched the exchange, a familiar weariness settling over her. Van would try to pawn it off on her. He always did. Yeah, fine, Ben mumbled, already sounding defeated. Then, a flicker of hope in his eyes. He looked at Reba. No, I don't want to. You tell her. Come on, you tell her. No, Reba said, her voice firm. She took a long sip of her coffee, savoring the bitter warmth. Please, please, please.